Well, welcome back, and thank you for your persistence in seeking the best for your church and for God's lost people. I'm Stan Granberg with Kairos Church Planting. I want to tell you how proud I am of you. You're working hard to help your church be a dynamic, healthy, growing church. And I know that's not easy, and you probably get discouraged along the way. But you're also working smart. By being a student of kairoscourses.com, you're taking advantage of the years of experience we've had working with churches, new and established, to grow your church into the 21st century. And this video is part of our Growth Surge course. You should plan 2 growth surges each year at the times of the year when people have more natural interest in church. And these are the early fall from the start of school to the holiday seasons, and then in the spring around Easter and Mother's Day. And these are your 2 peak growth seasons. It's important to take advantage of these surge times to cultivate invitational opportunities and plant relational gospel seeds. So right now, I want you to stop anything else you're doing so you can really hear the most important idea in this whole lesson. Inviting people to events where they can encounter Jesus is the most significant act of confessional faith your people may ever do. In the life of someone who's not a believer, the act of invitation is the most authentic, loving confession of faith your people will ever make. In this video, I'm going to provide for you some ideas about cultivating a culture of invitation among your people. We'll look at some essential prerequisites you need to address, and then some very practical action ideas. If you apply these ideas, you'll see your people begin to exercise their invitational skills, and more people will ultimately be saved. So let me ask you a question. What was your personal conversion pattern? Now let me explain. I assume that most of you, like me, have a heritage conversion pattern. You were raised in a home where your parents were Christians, church gatherings were part of your normal life, and you're used to doing life in Christian ways. Now, some of you may have a radical conversion pattern. You didn't grow up in a Christian environment, but someone took interest in you, shared with you the gospel of Jesus, and you became a believer. And a few of you may have a delayed conversion pattern. You grew up in a Christian environment, but somewhere along the way, you left it and you lived outside of Christian practice until one day, Jesus grabbed your heart again. Now, here's how conversion patterns intersect with a culture of invitation. People with radical and delayed conversion patterns find it easier to share their spiritual journey with those who aren't practicing believers than people with a heritage conversion pattern. Now, whether this is because they're more comfortable with non-believers, have a more ready appreciation of the power of God to change lives, or they just have more friends to work with, people with a heritage conversion pattern struggle more than those who have a radical or a delayed conversion pattern. So the point is, if your church is full of heritage conversion people, you're going to have to teach them the skill of inviting, which is, by the way, a form of sharing faith. Inviting others is a skill your people can learn and practice. So here's 3 research findings on why the skill of inviting is so important. My friend Sean Anderson, who wrote Living Dangerously, asked people who were not practicing believers how they were introduced to Jesus. And here's what he found. Fact 1, the most influential people by far in introducing an unbeliever to Jesus were family members. 52% said a relative was their most significant influence. 20% said a friend introduced them to Jesus. 18% said a minister, and only 10% said someone else. So if your people have any family or friends, tell them they are the most important influence for Jesus their family and their friends will ever have. So fact number 2, It doesn't take knowing a person a long time to get to the point of a spiritual conversation and an invitation. 48% of Sean's respondents said their most influential person told them about Jesus within the first 3 months of their relationship. Then another 42% said they knew that person for more than a year. And this tells us that whether you've just met someone or whether you've known them their whole life or your whole life, it's always a good time to talk about Jesus. And fact number 3 is that the characteristics people most responded to favorably in these spiritual encounters were 1, authenticity, 2, passion, 3, love, and 4, caring. So what you can tell your people is this: if Jesus is the most significant, life-changing relationship in their lives, then not sharing Jesus with family and friends is perhaps the most inauthentic, unloving, not caring thing they can do. If your people are passionately in love with Jesus, then inviting others and letting them in on the good news is absolutely authentic and caring. So in our world today, churches have to compete in a dynamic marketplace of competing philosophies, ideas, and activities. Back in the day, Christianity enjoyed a place of acceptance and respect, and going to church was what good people did. Today, Christianity no longer holds such dedicated space in people's lives. One of the reasons why even committed Christians may attend church only twice a month is the intensity of competition for their time, attention, and physical capacity, their tiredness, stress, and emotions. And what this means for us, church leaders, is that we must compete for people's attention. There's no givens we can depend on, and few freebies come our way. So what does it take to compete for people today? Here are 3 prerequisites that your church must meet for you to attract and hold new believers, to even be in their game. Now, the first of these prerequisites is value added. People are only going to give their time and attention to what they perceive brings value into their lives. Now, as Christians, we believe that nothing has more value than knowing Jesus. But in today's dynamic marketplace, people aren't looking for knowledge. In fact, the internet swamps them with knowledge daily. In a hierarchy of needs, knowledge may now be one of the last things that people look for. So what are the needs that drive people towards God today? Psychologist Stephen Rice, in his book, The 16 Strivings for God, identifies 5 primary motivations that drive people towards God and spiritual practice. First, families that work. Second, honor, which is moral responsibility or living well. Third is virtuous service. Fourth is ritual or experiencing God. And fifth is relational connectedness. Now, relational connectedness leads us to the second prerequisite, which is relational openness. So the second prerequisite for your church is you must be relationally open. A commonly spoken truism is that it takes 7 relationships for people to stick in your church. So how ready are your people to receive new people? It's very difficult for a church to know this about itself. Most churches I've worked with viewed themselves as friendly and open, but the perceptions of themselves and then how new people experience them may be entirely different. There is a way to objectively assess the likelihood of your church being relationally open. There's a strong relationship between how long your people have been in your church and relational openness. So first, what percentage of your people have been in your church 5 years or less and 2 years or less? The longer people have been in your church, the more closed your relational spaces become, no matter how friendly you are. And second, how long have your people been active believers? The longer they've been believers, the more closed they tend to be to new church relationships. And the third prerequisite is to be generationally connecting. Now, I've mentioned before BC and AC churches. BC churches began before computers. We might even say before cell phones. While AC churches began after computers. BC churches were designed by and for 20th century people. And AC churches are designed by and for 21st century people. And what this means is that our churches, if they are to survive well into the 21st century, must be able to attract and hold 21st century people. Joshua Granberg, whom you've seen in earlier videos, describes 3 tests every church must pass in order to attract and hold new millennial people. The first is the look test. What do they see? Now, this includes the physical spaces, the atmosphere, the decor, the presentation stage, the people on the stage. People are asking the question, can I see myself here? And if they can't see themselves with you, they won't stay. The second test you must pass to be generationally connecting is your language. What do they hear? And what do they not hear? Do they hear the types of words that make sense to them? Do they hear topics that address the questions they're asking, even those they may not have put into words yet themselves? Recently, a guest who was checking out our church referred to us as a smart church. And what he meant was we're addressing the questions he's asking. And then finally is learning. So we have look, language, and learning. Once we have passed through the gates of look and language, then people are open to learn. But this is a drip learning. It's learning that's drizzled slowly over life. The facts of the learning are not the main thing. The main thing is, does what they are learning make life meaningful and doable for them? So how do you do this? Now that we know something about prerequisites to attracting and holding new people, here are some practices you can use to cultivate a culture of invitation among your people. So first, let's talk about your staff and your leadership. You've got to develop a habit of sharing the spiritual conversations of the week with each other. As a church leader, you need to be having spiritual conversations with people during the week regularly. You need to be meeting people, finding out their stories and hearing their spiritual journeys. And then share these stories with your church staff and leaders. Create in your staff the expectation, this is what we do as kingdom leaders. We share spiritual conversations. A second practice for creating a culture invitation is to share invitation stories publicly. If you're the preacher, whoever is in the pulpit must share their own spiritual conversations and invitation experiences. As the preacher, when you share your spiritual conversations with people outside your church, you're providing leadership. You're modeling curiosity and courage. And you're revealing the activity of God in the world around your people. Your church leaders and members need to share publicly the testimonies about their personal invitation stories. And then get invitation stories from your guests. Your church needs to hear the stories of those people who were invited and then who came. And let your people hear stories from people all along the journey spectrum. First-time guests can be asked to share their story through first impression cards. Use 3 questions. How did you hear about our church? What helped you decide to come today? And what are your first impressions? And then you have people who are in the exploring stage. These are people who are exploring the meaning and commitments of Christianity through the experiences and relationships of your church. Explorers often say, I think I'm becoming a Christian. And then you have newly committed members, those people who have made the baptism commitment to Jesus as Lord, and your church as their spiritual center. And newly committed people who have been with you 2 years or less are the people you want to hear from. A third activity for your people is to invite their people. Make it easy for them to do this. Plan events where inviting is part of the event. And these are events like your twice-a-year growth surges, special holidays and events, special speakers, felt need workshops. All those are great invitational opportunities. You can provide your people invitation cards. Give them something in their hand that looks nice and carries the information that gives a whole lot of confidence to your people. And along with the invitation cards, give your people scripts to say. So many times your people actually do want to invite their people, but they get tongue-tied. Tell them what to say, give them a script. And here's a simple script. I would love for you to come to church with me Easter Sunday. How easy is that to say? So let your people know it. Another activity that you should begin to do is to practice hospitality in all your gatherings. In your major worship gatherings, make sure you have a good welcome team and system in place. Here's a phrase for simple welcome systems for your worship gathering. Greet, guide, and gather. So greet people at the door. A simple smiling face and an open door are powerful expressions of hospitality. Second, guide people through the experience. Where do they take their kids? Where are the bathrooms? Where do they sit? What should they do? Don't let people flounder around lost. You can do this with signs, with printed materials, with verbal cues. And then you can have dedicated people, those guides or ushers, who guide your guests through the experience. And finally, gather their contact information. In your major gatherings, give dedicated time for completing and gathering your connection cards by putting it into your printed order of worship. In your smaller gatherings, ask about who's new. Let your members who've brought invited friends introduce them. And contact these valued guests the next day to thank them for coming and that you're excited to get to know them. So remember, greet, guide, and gather. Now here's the one thing you can do to jumpstart your culture of invitation in your church. Start your own personal invitations. So who are the 3 people that are on your heart, that God has put in your path, that you really want to come with you to your big worship event? Beside each name, write down the day this week that you'll invite them. Now, here's my suggestion. Invite them to share a coffee time with you where you can connect in friendship. And use that time to tell them how much you would enjoy having them come to your worship event with you. And then finally, share your experiences from the pulpit with your staff and leaders. Your big day is coming. God is at work, and there are people who are ready to be invited to your church. So why don't you share with others in the comment box below your first invitation experience? We want to celebrate with you. So until next time, my friend, be good and be godly.